The day my legs stopped working was the same day my parents decided they had only one daughter. It wasn't a decision they announced over dinner or wrote in a letter. It was a quiet, suffocating shift in the atmosphere, like the air leaving a room the moment the door is sealed shut. I was 22 years old, fresh out of Vassar, with a degree in art history, and a naive belief that the world was waiting for me. Then came the rain, the slick asphalt of I-95, the screech of tires that still echoes in my nightmares, and finally, the silence. When I woke up in the ICU, the doctors used words like permanent, spinal transection, and paralysis. My mother Bernice didn't cry. She just looked at my legs under the thin hospital sheet as if they were a pair of expensive shoes that had been scuffed beyond repair, something to be discarded, not fixed. My name is Dolores. I am 48 years old now. For the last 26 years, I have viewed the world from the seated height of a wheelchair. You learn a lot about people when they have to look down to speak to you. You see the pity in their eyes, sure, but mostly you see the inconvenience. My father, Franklin, a man who built his identity on the pillars of strength, vitality, and corporate ruthlessness, couldn't stomach the sight of me. To him, I was no longer an asset. I was a liability, a depreciation on the family brand. Before the accident, I was the smart one, and my younger sister Arlene was the pretty one. It was a reductive categorization, but in our household labels were law. After the accident, Arlene became the only one. While I was still learning how to transfer myself from a bed to a chair, Franklin was already rewriting the family narrative. He stopped mentioning my name at the country club. My photos were quietly removed from the mantel in the grand foyer, replaced by shots of Arlene winning tennis tournaments or smiling at debutante balls. I remember coming home from the hospital 3 months later. I expected adjustments, a ramp, perhaps a bedroom on the first floor. Instead, I found my bags packed. Dolores, dear, Bernice had said, her voice tight and brittle, smelling of gin and expensive perfume. Your father and I have discussed this at length. The estate simply isn't equipped, and frankly, we aren't trained for your needs. It would be selfish of us to keep you here when professionals can do so much better. They weren't sending me to a high-end rehabilitation center. They were warehousing me. They framed it as an act of mercy, but even through the fog of my painkillers and grief, I saw the truth. I was an imperfection in their perfect life. Franklin stood by the window, his back to me, refusing to even meet my gaze. The car is waiting, Dolores. It's for the best. That was the last time I saw the interior of my childhood home for 2 decades. They shipped me off to a facility 2 hours away, erased my presence, and poured all their resources, love, and ambition into Arlene. They thought that by removing me they had solved the problem. They didn't realize that while my legs were broken, my mind was sharper than ever. And they certainly didn't realize that silence gives you a lot of time to watch, to listen, and to plan. The place they sent me to was called Oakbridge Haven. The name suggested rolling hills and compassionate nurses. The reality was industrial linoleum, the smell of boiled cabbage, and understaffed night shifts. It was a state-subsidized facility with a few private rooms for those who paid a premium, but Franklin and Bernice had opted for the budget package. They told everyone in their social circle that I was in an exclusive sanatorium in Switzerland or receiving private care in Vermont. The lies came easy to them. We just want her to have peace, Bernice would tell her friends, while I was struggling to get a nurse to help me change my sheets more than once a week. They sent me a monthly allowance of $50. 50. It was insulting, barely enough to buy toiletries and a few paperback books. Meanwhile, through the gossip columns and the rare, obligatory holiday phone calls, I learned of Arlene's life. Arlene got a convertible for her 25th birthday. Arlene toured Europe for a summer. Arlene was finding herself in Paris, then Rome, then Manhattan. My parents were funding a lifestyle of excess for one daughter, while the other was learning how to stretch a tube of toothpaste for 3 months, but despair is a luxury I couldn't afford. About 2 years into my stay at Oakbridge, I realized that if I was going to survive, I had to stop being Dolores the victim and start being someone else. I asked one of the kinder orderlies to bring me discarded newspapers, specifically the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal. Numbers became my solace. They were clean, predictable, and logical, everything my family was not. I taught myself forensic accounting. I devoured books on market analysis, corporate law, and tax loopholes. I had nothing but time. By the time I was 30, I had borrowed a laptop from the facility's rec room and started taking on freelance work under a pseudonym. I became DW Analysis. I started small auditing books for local small businesses, finding tax breaks they missed. My reputation grew. I was thorough, brutal, and entirely anonymous. Within 5 years, I was consulting for mid-sized corporations. I bought my own high-end laptop, a secure internet connection, and noise-canceling headphones. I sat in my cramped room at Oakbridge surrounded by peeling beige paint, moving millions of dollars of virtual capital for clients who thought I was a high-powered man in a skyscraper in Chicago. I didn't spend the money I made. I hoarded it. I invested it. I watched it grow. And I watched my father's company, Whitmore Enterprises. It wasn't hard to find their public filings. I tracked Franklin's decisions. I saw the reckless acquisitions in 2012, the quiet liquidation of assets in 2015, to cover operating costs, which I knew was code for Arlene's failed fashion line and Bernice's gambling debts. I watched them bleed the family fortune dry while pretending to be kings. I knew their financial health better than they did. They thought I was rotting away staring at a wall. They had no idea I was the ghost in their machine. 5 years ago, the landscape of my life shifted overnight. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesday was Meatloaf Day at Oakbridge. The facility administrator, a harried woman named Mrs. Gable, came into my room with a look of utter bewilderment. "Ms. Whitmore," she said, wringing her hands, "we've received a notification. Your account has been upgraded." "Upgraded?" I asked, looking up from my laptop. "By whom?" "It's anonymous," she said. "But the funds are substantial. They cover a transfer to the East Wing, the private suites, private therapy, dietary catering, new equipment. Everything is paid for. Indefinitely." My heart hammered against my ribs. I assumed it was a clerical error, or perhaps a state grant I had applied for years ago had finally come through. Or maybe, just maybe, my investments had triggered some sort of flagged payout I hadn't authorized. But the money was clean. I moved into a suite with a view of the garden. I got a customized titanium wheelchair that weighed half as much as my old clunker. I started intense physical therapy that didn't restore my walking, but gave me back my core strength and dignity. I never found out who sent the money. I assumed, perhaps foolishly, that maybe Franklin had a pang of conscience. Maybe as he aged, he realized what he had done. I let myself believe that fantasy for a fleeting moment. Then last week the phone rang. It wasn't a nurse or a client. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in 20 years. Home. "Dolores?" The voice was older, raspier, but unmistakably Bernice. "No, hello? No, how are you?" "Mother," I said, keeping my voice steady, though my hands gripped the armrests of my chair. "We need you to come home," she said. It sounded like an order, not an invitation. "Excuse me." "Ideally tomorrow. The car will pick you up at 10. It's Arlene. She's getting engaged. To Senator Sterling's boy. It's going to be the wedding of the decade, Dolores. We need everyone there. For the optics." "Optics," I repeated. "You haven't visited me in 15 years, Mother. You didn't call when I had pneumonia. You didn't call on my 40th birthday. And now you want me for optics?" "Don't be difficult." She snapped, her facade slipping. "There are legal matters to attend to as well. Your father says it's time to settle the old family trusts before Arlene's big day. Just some signatures. We're sending the town car. Be ready." She hung up. I sat there for a long time listening to the dial tone. They didn't want to see me. They needed a signature. They needed to settle a trust. My forensic brain kicked into gear. Why now? Why before the wedding? Why was my presence mandatory? I looked at my reflection in the darkened screen of my laptop. I wasn't the scared 22-year-old girl anymore. I was DW Analysis. I was a woman who could spot a shell company from 3 spreadsheets away. Okay, Franklin, I whispered to the empty room. I'll come home, but I'm bringing my calculator. The drive back to the estate took 2 hours. The chauffeur was a man I didn't recognize. The old staff had likely been fired years ago to cut costs, a trend I had noticed in Franklin's quarterly reports. As the wrought iron gates of the Whitmore estate swung open, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest, a phantom echo of the girl I used to be. The house was exactly as I remembered, an imposing Georgian manor of red brick and white pillars, standing amidst manicured lawns that screamed of wealth and exclusion. But looking closer, I saw the cracks. The ivy was overgrown on the west wing. The paint on the shutters was peeling slightly. To the untrained eye, it was majestic. To me, it looked like a company on the verge of Chapter 11 bankruptcy. The car stopped. No one came out to greet me. The chauffeur unpacked my wheelchair, helped me transfer, and left my bags on the driveway. I wheeled myself up the ramp, a new addition likely installed for an elderly relative, or perhaps just for code compliance, and rang the bell. The door opened, and there stood Arlene. She hadn't aged well. At 44, she was trying too hard to look 25. Her face was tight with Botox, her smile stretched and predatory. She wore a white sundress that cost more than my entire first year at Oakbridge. "Dolores!" she exclaimed, leaning down to air kiss near my cheek without actually touching me. "My God, you look healthy. We expected you to be more frail." "It's good to see you too, Arlene," I said dryly. "Congratulations on the engagement." "Oh, thank you. Todd is wonderful. His father is the senator, you know. It's a very important merger, I mean marriage." She laughed, a tinkling hollow sound. Come in, come in. Mom and Dad are in the solarium." I rolled into the foyer. It was stripped. The original oil paintings were gone, replaced by modern abstract pieces that I recognized as cheaper prints. They had been selling off the art. "We've set you up in the garden room," Arlene said, gesturing to a door off the kitchen hallway. The garden room. It used to be the sewing room for the maids. It was cramped, smelled of damp earth, and was as far away from the family quarters as possible without putting me in the garage. "Not my old room?" I asked. "Oh, don't be silly. That's the guest bridal suite now. Besides," she glanced at my wheels. "The stairs. The elevator has been finicky. Maintenance costs, you understand." I understood perfectly. I wheeled myself toward the solarium. I could hear Franklin's booming voice before I saw him. "If the liquidity isn't there by Friday, the Sterling family will smell blood. We need that trust unlocked, Bernice." "She's here, Franklin. Keep your voice down," my mother hissed. I paused just outside the doorway. "Is she lucid?" Franklin asked. "That place she's been in? It's a dump. Is she mentally capable of signing?" "Does it matter?" Bernice replied. "Mr. Whitaker will guide her hand if he has to. It's a formality. The trust is empty anyway, isn't it? We just need the rights transferred so we can use the property as collateral for the dowry loan." "The trust isn't empty. It's complicated," Franklin grumbled. "Just get her to sign the waiver. Tell her it's for her own good. Tell her the money is gone and this releases her from liability. She's a cripple, Bernice, not a lawyer. She won't know the difference." I took a deep breath, fixed a neutral expression on my face, and rolled into the room. "Hello, Mother. Hello, Father." They jumped as if they'd seen a ghost. Lunch was a theatrical production of cruelty. We sat in the formal dining room, the table set with the good china that I knew Bernice was terrified of breaking because she couldn't afford to replace it. The table was long, and they had placed me at the far end, distinct and separate, while the 3 of them clustered near the head. "So, Dolores," Franklin began, cutting his steak with aggressive precision. He looked older, his skin gray and papery, his hands carrying a slight tremor he tried to hide with his wine glass. "How is the facility?" "It's adequate," I said, taking a sip of water. "Quiet. We pay a fortune for it." Bernice sighed, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. "You have no idea, Dolores, the sacrifices we've made to keep you there. Private care is astronomical these days. We've had to cut back on so many things just to ensure you're comfortable." I watched her face. It was a masterclass in lying. "I appreciate that," I said. "I know money has been tight." Arlene snorted. "Tight? It's been a nightmare. Do you know how much a wedding costs? And here we are still pouring money into a black hole." She gestured vaguely at me. "No offense, Dee, but it's not like you're doing anything with your life. You just sit there." "I read," I said. "I keep busy. Reading doesn't pay the bills," Franklin grunted. "Which brings us to the matter at hand. Tomorrow Mr. Whitaker is coming over. There are some old family trusts set up by your great-aunt Edith. You remember her crazy old bat?" "I remember her," I said. Aunt Edith had been the only one who didn't look at me with pity. She had died 2 years after my accident. "Well," Franklin continued, "the trust she left was poorly managed. It's essentially worthless now, mostly tied up in dead assets. But because your name is on the original deed alongside mine, we can't liquidate the final remnants to clear the books without your signature. We want to close it out, transfer the residual, what little there is, to Arlene's account to help with the wedding. It's the least you can do, really, considering everything we've done for you." "So I'm signing away my inheritance?" I asked innocently. "Inheritance?" Bernice laughed shrilly. "Oh, honey, there is no inheritance. The medical bills ate that up years ago. This is just housekeeping, cleaning up the mess." "I see," I said. "So I'm just signing a release." "Exactly," Franklin said, relaxing slightly. "A release, absolving you of any debts associated with the trust. We're doing you a favor, Dolores. If you don't sign, the creditors could come after your disability checks." That was a lie, a sloppy amateur lie. Creditors couldn't touch federal disability, and even if they could, a trust beneficiary isn't liable for the trust's debts unless they are the trustee. Franklin was trying to scare me. "Well," I said, "I suppose I should look at the papers." "Mr. Whitaker will explain everything," Arlene said, checking her phone. "God, can we hurry this up? I have a fitting at 2. They looked at me with such disdain. They saw a helpless woman in a wheelchair, a leech on their fortune. They didn't see D.W. Analysis, the woman who had spent last night reviewing the public tax records of the shell company Franklin had registered in the Cayman Islands. They didn't know I knew about the consulting fees he paid himself. "I'm looking forward to seeing Mr. Whitaker," I said, offering a small, tight smile. Mr. Whitaker had been the family attorney for 40 years. He was a decent man, bound by attorney-client privilege, but possessed of a moral compass that often put him at odds with Franklin. When he arrived the next morning, he looked weary. He carried a heavy leather briefcase and walked with a stoop. I was waiting in the library, the room where I used to hide and read as a child. The smell of old paper and lemon polish was nostalgic. "Miss Dolores," Whitaker said, bowing his head. "It has been a long time." "It has, Arthur," I said. "Please sit." He sat opposite me. He didn't open his briefcase immediately. He looked at the door to ensure it was closed. "Your father, hey," he began, lowering his voice, "is a desperate man. I assume you know that." "I can read a balance sheet, Arthur. I know the company is leveraged to the hilt." He looked surprised. "You follow the business." "I follow everything," I said. "Tell me about this trust." He sighed and opened the case. "The Edith Vance Trust. Your father claims it is insolvent. He wants you to sign a waiver relinquishing your claim to the principal and interest, transferring sole beneficence to him, which he will then gift to Arlene." "And is it insolvent?" Whitaker hesitated. He pulled out a document. On paper, the assets listed by your father, some properties in Detroit, a failing textile mill, are indeed worthless. However, he slid a piece of paper toward me. This is the full schedule of assets. I am legally obligated to show you this, even if your father demanded I simply summarize it. I scanned the document. My eyes flew over the columns. Detroit property, mill, and then buried in the subclauses I saw it. Class B shares Berkshire Hathaway, acquired 1998. He didn't list the stocks, I whispered. He omitted them from the summary he gave me to read to you, Whitaker said carefully. But they are in the trust. The trust isn't empty, Dolores. It's worth approximately $12 million. I looked up at him. And he wants me to sign this away so he can use it to pay off his debts and buy Arlene a husband. Essentially, he is banking on the fact that you won't read the fine print. There's something else, I said, my mind racing. If the trust has this much money, why have they been complaining about my medical bills for 20 years? Surely the trust income could have covered my care at a better facility. Whitaker's face went pale. He looked down at his hands. Dolores, there is a discrepancy regarding your care costs. I prepared some documents for this meeting that your father is not expecting. I think it is time you saw the full picture. What discrepancy? I cannot say more until your father is present. It needs to be on the record. But be prepared. The door handle rattled. Franklin and Bernice swept in, followed by Arlene. Conspiring with the enemy, Arthur, Franklin joked, though his eyes were cold. Let's get this over with. I have a tea time at 1. Franklin took the seat at the head of the heavy oak table. Bernice stood behind him, a hand on his shoulder like a supportive political wife. Arlene slumped in a velvet armchair, looking bored. All right, Franklin said, slapping his palms on the wood. Simple procedure. Dolores Arthur has the waiver. You sign at the bottom. We get this trust closed, you go back to your home, and we all move on. Whitaker placed the document in front of me. This is the waiver, Dolores. By signing this, you acknowledge that you have received full disclosure of the trust's value, and you voluntarily forfeit your interest. I picked up the pen. I felt Franklin's eyes boring into me. He was practically vibrating with greed. Just sign it, D, Arlene sighed. God, you're so dramatic. I held the pen over the paper. Then I set it down. I have a few questions, I said. Franklin's face reddened. Questions? What questions? It's legalese, Dolores. You wouldn't understand it. Actually, I said, my voice projecting clearly in the quiet room, I'm curious about the valuation of the Class B shares listed in Schedule C. The document implies a zero-value liquidation, but by my calculation, based on yesterday's closing bell, that portfolio is yielding a dividend that should have been reinvested quarterly. Where did those dividends go, Father? Silence. Absolute, stunned silence. Franklin blinked. What? The stocks, I said. And the municipal bonds. You listed them as distressed assets, but these are AAA-rated bonds. Why would I sign away $12 million for nothing? Is that the standard exchange rate for sacrifices these days? Bernice gasped. 12 million. What is she talking about, Franklin? Franklin glared at Whitaker. You showed her. You betrayed my confidence. I fulfilled my fiduciary duty, Franklin, Whitaker said calmly. She's a cripple, Franklin shouted, slamming his fist down. She doesn't need that money. She sits in a room all day. Arlene has a future. Arlene has a life. That money belongs to the family, not to her. I am the family father, I said, and I am not signing. You will sign. Franklin stood up, his face purple. After everything we did, we paid for that nursing home, we paid for your surgeries, we paid for your food, your wheelchair, your very existence. We bled ourselves dry for you. You owe us this. Do I asked. Do I really owe you? Every penny, he screamed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. We could have abandoned you to the state, but we paid. I wrote those checks every month for 20 years. Me, my sweat, my money. I looked at Whitaker. He gave a microscopic nod. Actually, father, I said. I don't think you did. What did you say? Franklin's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. I said I don't think you paid for anything, I replied. Arthur, if you please. Mr. Whitaker reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick, dusty accordion folder. He stood up and placed it in the center of the table. Franklin, Whitaker said, you instructed me to audit the care facility payments to demonstrate to Dolores how much you've spent. You wanted to use the guilt angle, so I subpoenaed the records from Oakbridge Haven. Good, Franklin blustered. Show her the bills. I have the bills, Whitaker said, and I have the canceled checks used to pay them. He opened the folder and spread out a fan of paper checks. They were old, some yellowed with age. Look at them, Franklin, Whitaker commanded. Franklin looked down. He sneered at first, expecting to see his own signature. But as his eyes focused on the handwriting, his expression froze. The signature wasn't his. It wasn't Bernice's. It was a loop of elegant, shaky script that I recognized instantly. Edith Vance. Aunt Edith, Arlene asked, peering over Franklin's shoulder. But she's been dead for 15 years. She set up an annuity, Whitaker explained. Before she died, Edith came to me. She suspected, Franklin, that you would try to cut costs on Dolores's care, so she arranged for the trust to pay the facility directly, every month, for the last 20 years. Franklin stared at the checks. No, he whispered. No, I paid. I sent the... You sent nothing, Whitaker cut in. I checked the Whitmore accounts. You stopped payments the month Dolores left the hospital. You told everyone you were paying. You complained about the cost you used, the burden of Dolores to justify your bad business decisions and your selling off of assets. But you never paid a dime. Aunt Edith paid. And for the last 5 years, the anonymous upgrade. I looked at Whitaker. That wasn't Edith. No. Whitaker smiled at me. That was the surplus interest from the trust finally kicking in. It was your own money, Dolores. You've been paying for yourself. Franklin's hands began to shake. It started in his fingers rattling against the mahogany table. Then it traveled up his arms. He looked at the checks, the proof of his lie, the proof of his greed. He looked at the signature of the woman he had called a crazy bat. You lied to us, Bernice whispered, looking at her husband. You told me we were broke because of her medical bills. You told me that's why I couldn't have the renovation. That's why we had to sell the lake house. I needed capital, Franklin stammered, his shaking hands knocking over his wine glass. Red wine spilled across the checks like blood. The market was down. I had to... You stole it, I said. You stole the money you claimed you were spending on me, and you squandered it. The room felt small, the air thick with the smell of spilled wine and ruin. Franklin sank back into his chair, his hands still trembling uncontrollably. He looked old, defeated, and pathetic. But that's not all, is it, Arthur? I asked. No, Whitaker said. He pulled out one final document. It was a heavy parchment with a wax seal. Edith's last will and testament had a contingency clause. Clause 4A. Should Franklin Whitmore ever attempt to disinherit Dolores Whitmore, or should it be proven that he failed to provide for her care, the controlling interest of Whitmore Enterprises, which I hold in silent partnership, shall immediately transfer to Dolores Whitmore. Arlene screamed. It was a short, sharp sound. What does that mean? It means, I said, rolling my wheelchair forward, that I own the company. I own this house. I own the cars. I own the very chair you are sitting in, Arlene. You can't run a company, Franklin shouted, his voice cracking. You're a cripple. You don't know anything about business. I laughed. It was a genuine, hearty laugh that felt wonderful. Father, I said, have you heard of DW analysis? He blinked. The auditor. The one who flagged our Cayman accounts last month. The one who terrified the board into freezing my bonus. DW. I pointed to myself. Dolores Whitmore. I've been auditing your books for 6 months, Franklin. I know about the embezzlement. I know about the bribes to the zoning commissioner. I know everything. Arlene looked from me to Franklin, horror dawning on her face. Daddy, is this true? What about my wedding? What about Todd? Todd won't marry you without the dowry, Arlene, I said gently. And there is no dowry, because the money belongs to me. Bernice began to weep loud, ugly sobs. We're ruined. We're homeless. Not necessarily, I said. I'm not you, Mother. I don't abandon family. The transition took 3 weeks. I didn't move back into the main house immediately. I stayed in the garden room while I had the master suite retrofitted with elevators and ramps. I fired the old board of directors and installed a team I had vetted personally through my network as DW Analysis. Franklin and Bernice were not thrown out onto the street. I purchased a small 2-bedroom condo for them in Florida. It's in a retirement community. It's clean, safe, and adequate. I set them up with a monthly allowance of $2,000. It's significantly more than the $50 they gave me, but Franklin still complains about it every time we speak. He claims it's hard to live on a fixed income. I told him he should learn to budget. Arlene's engagement fell apart as predicted. Without the Whitmore millions, Senator Sterling found her incompatible with his son's political ambitions. She had to get a job. She works as a receptionist at an art gallery now. She hates it, but she calls me once a week to ask for money. Sometimes I give it to her, sometimes I don't. It depends on how polite she is. Today, I am sitting on the terrace of the estate. The sun is warm on my face. The garden is in full bloom, tended to by a staff that is paid fair wages. My customized wheelchair hums softly as I adjust the recline. I look down at my legs. They are still broken. They will always be broken. But looking at the paperwork on my lap, the quarterly earnings report showing Whitmore Enterprises is finally in the black, I realize that I am not. My father's hands shook because he realized he had lost control. He shook because he saw the ghost of the sister he underestimated and the daughter he discarded. He shook because he realized that while he was busy trying to hide me, I was busy becoming the person who would eventually save and judge him. They tried to bury me, as the old saying goes. They forgot I was a seed. Life has a funny way of balancing the scales, doesn't it? Sometimes the people we underestimate the most are the ones quietly building the strength to change everything. Dolores taught us that dignity isn't given, it's forged in the dark. If this story moved you, or if you've ever had to prove your worth to people who didn't believe in you, please leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Dolores was too kind to her parents in the end, or was her mercy the ultimate revenge? Let me know below. Thank you for reading Dolores's journey. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. Stay strong.